On November 12, 1944, at 05:47 hours on Leyte Island in the Philippines, Staff Sergeant Marcus O'Brien, a 24-year-old soldier, found himself positioned behind a collapsed rice paddy wall during the pre-dawn darkness. After 47 hours without adequate rest, exhaustion had taken its toll, causing his hands to shake as he gripped his M1 Garand rifle. The weapon's 9.5-pound weight seemed particularly burdensome in his cramping fingers. Through the darkness, he could detect movement in the jungle tree line, the sounds of whispered Japanese communications, and the distinctive metallic clicks of rifle bolts being operated. His squad, which had numbered 19 men the previous morning, had been reduced to 11 soldiers scattered along a 30-yard defensive position. When O'Brien observed movement approximately 300 yards distant in the dim light, he raised his rifle and peered through the sights. What he initially perceived as a small group quickly revealed itself to be a much larger force, dozens of soldiers, perhaps an entire company, methodically spreading into assault formation. As he positioned his finger on the trigger, O'Brien understood the stark mathematics of his situation. His M1 Garand held 8 rounds in its en-bloc clip, providing him with 8 opportunities to engage the approaching enemy before requiring a reload. The numerical disparity made the tactical situation appear untenable. However, O'Brien could not have known that within exactly 48 hours he would be equipped with a weapon system that would fundamentally alter the dynamics of infantry combat in the Pacific Theater. The firepower dilemma of 1944. By November 1944, American military forces engaged in operations across the Pacific Theater confronted a mathematical problem with lethal consequences. The standard M1 Garand rifle represented a significant achievement in firearms engineering, semi-automatic, mechanically reliable, and accurate at combat ranges. This weapon provided American infantry with a tactical advantage over Japanese forces, who predominantly carried bolt-action Arisaka rifles. General George S. Patton characterized the M1 Garand as the greatest battle implement ever devised. Despite these advantages, the weapon possessed one significant limitation that proved critical in jungle warfare conditions. The M1 Garand's en-bloc clip held 8 rounds. In the dense jungle environments of the Philippines, New Guinea, and Okinawa, American infantry units repeatedly encountered massed Japanese banzai charges, coordinated assault tactics that employed 50, 100, or sometimes more than 200 soldiers attacking simultaneously. The mathematical analysis of these engagements revealed a disturbing pattern. An individual rifleman armed with an M1 Garand could deliver approximately 8 aimed shots in roughly 6 seconds under optimal conditions. The reloading process required an additional 3 to 4 seconds, assuming the soldier maintained composure and his hands remained functional despite sweat and mud. This allowed a maximum of approximately 12 aimed shots within a 10-second period. Japanese banzai charges could traverse 100 yards in under 15 seconds, creating a temporal window during which American firepower proved insufficient to stop determined attackers. Between January and November 1944, American casualties in the Pacific Theater exceeded 87,000 personnel. Intelligence analyses from Leyte, Peleliu, and Saipan identified a consistent tactical pattern. American infantry squads, despite superior weaponry and training, experienced tactical failures during the final moments of close-range engagements. These failures occurred not due to inferior marksmanship or flawed tactical doctrine, but rather because soldiers could not deliver sufficient projectiles quickly enough when enemy infantry closed from 50 yards to contact range. The Browning automatic rifle provided partial mitigation through its 20-round capacity and sustained fire capability. However, at 19.4 pounds when loaded, the bar served as a squad support weapon rather than individual equipment. Standard infantry organization allocated 1 bar gunner per squad. When that gunner became a casualty and bar gunners frequently drew concentrated enemy fire, the squad's suppressive firepower decreased by approximately 40%.
Field commanders throughout the Pacific expressed increasing concern about this tactical deficiency. After-action reports from the 1st Marine Division's operations on Peleliu in September 1944 documented the problem in quantitative detail. During the assault on Bloody Nose Ridge, Marine rifle companies averaged 1 operational BAR per platoon rather than per squad, primarily due to casualties and mechanical failures caused by coral dust infiltration. Japanese defenders, though ultimately defeated, achieved a 1.6-to-1 casualty ratio during close-range counterattacks. Given American advantages in semi-automatic rifles, superior training, tactical air support, and artillery capabilities, this ratio should have favored American forces. However, in the final 50 yards of engagement, none of these advantages proved decisive. The determining factor became trigger time, the number of projectiles a soldier could deliver toward an attacker before that attacker reached defensive positions with bayonets or grenades. The situation would become even more acute during the February 1945 Iwo Jima operations. However, by that point, a classified program designated Project Hellstorm by the Ordnance Corps would already be deploying a solution. This solution contradicted established principles of firearms design and tactical doctrine. The system combined components from a B-17 bomber gun turret with America's standard infantry rifle. The official military designation would be T-22 Garand AN-M2 hybrid. Combat soldiers would develop their own nomenclature. Japanese forces who encountered the weapon would describe it using a term that roughly translates to death that flies from rifle barrels, an acknowledgement that American engineers had effectively transformed an infantry rifle into something resembling an airborne weapon system. November 14, 1944. Introduction to an impossible solution. When Staff Sergeant O'Brien arrived at Tacloban Airfield at 13:20 hours on November 14, 1944, his initial reaction to the weapon displayed on the armorer's bench was skepticism. The device appeared to combine familiar and incongruous elements. The lower portion consisted of a standard M1 Garand, the recognizable walnut stock and distinctive action mechanism. However, where the barrel typically terminated with the gas cylinder and front sight, an entirely different component had been integrated. A cylindrical rotary magazine, identical in configuration to ammunition drums suspended beneath gun turrets on B-17 Flying Fortress bombers, visible on the adjacent hardstand, had been mounted to the rifle. The young ordnance captain, approximately 26 years old, with oil stains on his uniform, displayed the satisfied demeanor of someone who had solved a problem that others had considered impossible. He identified the weapon as the T-22 Garand AN-M2 hybrid, unofficially referred to as the airborne Garand. The specifications were remarkable. The drum held 75 rounds of 10-30-06 ammunition, a significant departure from the standard 8-round N-block clip. The fully loaded weapon weighed 23.7 pounds, more than double the standard Garand's 9.5-pound weight, and exceeding even the BAR's mass. The overall length extended to 51 inches due to the modified barrel assembly and drum attachment mechanism. O'Brien expressed concern about the weapon's weight. The captain responded by explaining that the weight had been precisely calibrated to operational requirements. Demonstrating surprising ease in handling the weapon, he explained the engineering that made the system functional. The drum had been modified from the AN-M2 aircraft gun ammunition system. Engineers had extracted the feeding mechanism, reduced it to essential components, and integrated it with the Garand's gas operation system. The rifle continued to fire in semi-automatic mode, 1 round per trigger press, but now provided 75 trigger presses before requiring a magazine change. The engineering represented both brilliance and audacity. The standard M1 Garand operated using a gas system in which expanding gases from burning powder were diverted through a barrel port, driving a piston that cycled the action. This system had proven simple, reliable, and effective in combat conditions. The AN-M2 aircraft gun employed a similar principle at larger scale, designed to fire the same .30-06 cartridge at rates between 750 and 850 rounds per minute in full automatic mode from bomber gun turrets. Ordnance Corps engineers had adapted the AN-M2's feed system, the spring-loaded rotary drum that had demonstrated complete reliability at 30,000 feet in sub-zero temperatures, to function with the Garand's semi-automatic cycling mechanism. The drum connected to the rifle through a modified gas cylinder assembly. Each time the rifle fired, the gas system not only cycled the bolt, but also advanced the drum's feed mechanism, positioning the subsequent round for chambering. The captain explained that the drum operated on a spring-loaded principle, similar to a watch mechanism. Loading required approximately 90 seconds with practice. Once mounted to the rifle, the weapon fed and fired like a standard Garand, except the ammunition supply continued beyond 8 rounds.
The rate of fire matched that of a standard Garand, 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute, dependent on the shooter's skill level. However, the sustained fire capability represented a revolutionary advance. Where a rifleman with a standard Garand could deliver 8 rounds, reload in approximately 4 seconds under combat stress, deliver 8 more rounds, and reload again, perhaps managing 24 rounds in 15 seconds before stress and fatigue degraded performance, the T-22 could deliver 75 rounds in under 2 minutes without interruption. This eliminated reload pauses, fumbling with en-bloc clips, and moments of vulnerability when hands were occupied with reloading rather than shooting. When O'Brien inquired about recoil characteristics, the captain explained that the weapon produced recoil identical to a standard M1. The drum's mass functioned as a counterbalance, actually absorbing some muzzle rise. He then invited O'Brien to test-fire the weapon. As O'Brien hefted the T-22, he immediately noticed the unfamiliar weight distribution. The balance differed significantly from what his muscles had learned through thousands of repetitions. However, after a moment of adjustment, he located the center of gravity, brought the weapon to his shoulder, and aligned the sights, standard Garand sights that felt familiar and precise. O'Brien asked about the number of T-22s in existence. The captain explained that in the Philippines, 47 weapons were currently available, with approximately 150 produced worldwide. The captain's expression became more serious as he clarified that the T-22 represented experimental equipment undergoing field testing. Authorization existed to issue 2 weapons per rifle company and 3 per weapons platoon. O'Brien and 1 other soldier in his unit would carry these weapons, while the remainder of the unit would retain standard Garands. O'Brien squeezed the trigger. The rifle produced a familiar crack, and the bolt cycled smoothly. He fired repeatedly, 10 rounds in as many seconds, and had barely begun to deplete the drum's capacity. For the first time in 47 sleepless hours, Marcus O'Brien smiled. November 15, 1944. Combat validation at Defense Line Charlie 7. Staff Sergeant O'Brien had returned to defensive positions for 6 hours when the anticipated Japanese attack materialized. The assault commenced at 0512 hours, contradicting intelligence predictions regarding both timing and direction. The attack originated from the northeast, where jungle growth thickened into nearly impenetrable undergrowth. O'Brien detected the assault orally before visual confirmation. The distinctive, organized, ritualistic battle cries of Japanese soldiers executing a banzai charge. These were soldiers who had accepted the possibility of death, advancing with fixed bayonets and grenades in the conviction that they would either breach American lines or perish in the attempt. Contact was announced, though the warning proved unnecessary as every soldier could hear the approaching assault. O'Brien assumed his firing position, settling the T-22 Garand against his shoulder. Though front-heavy, the weapon remained stable.
the drum pressed against his ribcage, representing 75 opportunities to engage the emerging threat. At 0513 hours, the first Japanese soldiers emerged from the tree line. In the gray pre-dawn light, O'Brien counted approximately 40 men in the initial assault wave, spread across a 100-yard front. They advanced rapidly in crouched positions with rifles at port arms. The distance closed quickly, 200 yards, then 190, then 180. Standard tactical doctrine recommended initiating rifle fire at 150 yards to maximize accuracy and prevent ammunition waste. O'Brien engaged the lead soldier, a tall individual carrying what appeared to be an officer's sword, at 175 yards.
The T-22 fired. The Japanese officer stumbled and fell. O'Brien immediately shifted to the next target and fired, then shifted again and fired again. He found himself firing faster than would have been possible with a standard Garand because his mind registered with complete certainty that he did not need to count rounds, anticipate the reload, or think about anything except sight picture, trigger press, and target selection. In 3 seconds, he fired 5 rounds, bringing down 3 Japanese soldiers at ranges between 150 and 175 yards. Adjacent to O'Brien's position, Private First Class Jimmy DeLuca, the second squad member issued a T-22, opened fire with the same devastating rhythm. The sound signature proved distinctive, a rapid series of individual shots rather than the prolonged roar of a BAR on full automatic, but more precise and surgical in application. Each shot was deliberate, yet the shots came so rapidly they nearly blurred together. The Japanese assault faltered. O'Brien observed confusion rippling through their formation. The attackers had anticipated the standard American response, riflemen who could deliver 8 shots, perhaps 16 if multiple soldiers concentrated fire, followed by crucial seconds of vulnerability during reload. Those reload pauses never materialized. At 23 rounds, O'Brien continued firing as Japanese infantry broke left and right, seeking cover that did not exist in the cleared killing zone fronting the American position. At 0514 hours, 30 seconds into the engagement, O'Brien had fired 29 rounds. 8 Japanese soldiers had fallen, 5 clearly dead, 3 wounded and immobile. The mathematical impossibility of this situation registered even as his finger continued working the trigger. 29 rounds in 30 seconds from a single rifle position. With a standard Garand, he would have cycled through 3 complete clips, experiencing 2 reload cycles that would have provided attackers with 6 to 8 seconds to cover critical ground. Instead, he had been shooting continuously, and the Japanese attack, 40 men strong, coordinated, and determined, was disintegrating under fire that theoretically should not exist. DeLuca shouted that the enemy was withdrawing. The survivors, approximately 20 men, retreated into the jungle, dragging wounded comrades and abandoning their dead in the rice paddy. O'Brien checked his drum capacity, 41 rounds remaining. The engagement had lasted 47 seconds from first shot to ceasefire. He had expended 34 rounds. With his standard M1 Garand, he could have delivered, under generous assumptions, perhaps 24 rounds in that same time frame, including reloads. The difference represented 12 Japanese soldiers who would have advanced 100 yards closer to the American position. Those 12 soldiers would have reached grenade range, transforming a defensive victory into a close-quarters engagement with probable American casualties. DeLuca quietly expressed astonishment, staring at his T-22 as though seeing it for the first time. O'Brien finished the thought. The experience had been fundamentally different. His hands were steady now. The exhaustion had burned away, replaced by something sharper and clearer. At 0537 hours, a second attack materialized from the west.
This assault employed greater force, more than 60 Japanese infantry, with what appeared to be 3 light machine gun teams providing suppressive fire from the tree line. The Type 96 machine guns opened fire first, their distinctive sound accompanying rounds that tore up the dirt fronting American positions, forcing defenders to take cover.
O'Brien did not remain in cover. He located a machine gun position by its muzzle flash, identified the shadowy shapes operating the weapon, and began engaging the target. The range was considerable, perhaps 280 yards, but the T-22's barrel actually exceeded the length of a standard Garand's barrel, and the accuracy remained adequate. He fired 6 rounds at the machine gun nest, adjusting his point of aim based on observed impacts. The 6th round struck something critical. The machine gun fell silent. The Japanese infantry surged forward during what should have been O'Brien's reload time. They were exploiting the expected gap in fire that would occur if he carried a standard rifle. The gap never came. O'Brien shifted from the machine gun position to the advancing infantry, and his trigger finger resumed work with the same deliberate, methodical rhythm. DeLuca fired beside him. The squad's BAR gunner, Corporal Hernandez, added his weapon to the defensive fire. 3 sustained fire weapons operated simultaneously. The Japanese infantry formation dissolved, not retreated, but dissolved. 37 seconds into the engagement, 18 enemy soldiers lay in a rough semicircle between 120 and 200 yards from the American position. The survivors broke and ran without organization or covering fire, pure survival instinct overriding military discipline. O'Brien's drum emptied at round 73. He had miscounted and thought he possessed more ammunition. For one moment, the old fear and the old mathematical problem reasserted themselves. Then he remembered that Hernandez continued firing, DeLuca continued firing, and the defensive line had not collapsed into individual riflemen counting rounds and hoping their reloads would be fast enough. The line held. The fire remained sustained. O'Brien released the empty drum, a process requiring 4 seconds as he worked unfamiliar releases, and locked a fresh drum into position. Loading the drum would require 90 seconds, a duration he wished could be shortened, but the tactical situation had already shifted. The Japanese forces were no longer attacking. They were retreating, reorganizing, attempting to understand what had occurred. Lieutenant Barnes ordered a ceasefire to conserve ammunition. In the sudden silence, O'Brien could hear his own harsh, rapid breathing. His shoulders ached from the T-22's weight, from holding the front-heavy rifle steady through 73 shots. However, his hands were not shaking. His squad was not scattered. Nobody had died. As the sun rose over the jungle tree line, illuminating the rice paddies in golden light, O'Brien counted bodies. 26 Japanese soldiers were visible in the killing zone, with certainly more casualties in the jungle. According to every historical precedent, every tactical analysis, and every after-action report from Peleliu, Saipan, and Tarawa, the 2 attacks should have overrun the American position through sheer momentum and numerical superiority.
DeLuca asked what the weapons should be called as he cleaned his T-22, running a patch through the barrel. O'Brien considered the question. He thought about 75 rounds without reloading, about Japanese infantry charging forward with absolute confidence and then faltering, stumbling, and breaking under fire that never ceased. He thought about airborne gun drums married to infantry rifles in a configuration that seemed impossible but functioned effectively. The term came to him spontaneously: flying death rifles. DeLuca grinned, agreeing that the designation was appropriate. After-action reports from Leyte reached Ordnance Corps headquarters in Manila within 18 hours of O'Brien's engagement. By November 20, 1944, emergency authorization approved tripling T-22 production. By December 1st, 327 T-22 Garand AN/M2 hybrids were operational in the Philippines, distributed at a rate of 3 per rifle company across the 6th Army. However, production faced a rigid cap. The bottleneck was not the Garands themselves. Springfield Armory and Winchester were producing these rifles by the tens of thousands. The constraint was the drums. Each AN/M2 drum required precision machining, hand-fitting, and spring tensioning calibrated to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. The drums had originally been designed for bomber gun turrets, equipment that received depot-level maintenance, operated in controlled environments, and could be removed and serviced between missions. Infantry rifles existed in radically different conditions. They functioned in mud, rain, and coral dust. They were dropped, stepped on, and went weeks without proper cleaning. Despite their battlefield effectiveness, the T-22 drums failed at rates the Ordnance Corps considered unacceptable for mass deployment. Approximately 1 in every 12 drums experienced feed failures after 500 rounds. 1 in 8 showed stress fractures in the spring mechanism after 30 days of field use. Manufacturing capacity presented the second constraint. Each drum required 47 hours of machining and assembly time. For comparison, a complete M1 Garand required 26 hours. By late 1944, the United States was producing 5,000 Garands per day across all manufacturers. Drum production peaked at 93 per day, barely sufficient to equip 2 infantry divisions. Consequently, distribution remained limited and strategic, 3 T-22s per rifle company. The weapons were allocated to designated marksmen, soldiers like O'Brien who had demonstrated accuracy under stress and could be trusted with irregular equipment. Training emphasized the T-22's specific role: sustained suppressive fire during enemy assaults, counterfire against Japanese light machine guns, and breaking banzai charges before they reached grenade range. The tactical impact spread across the theater. On Mindoro Island in December 1944, a single rifle platoon equipped with 4 T-22s held a beach landing zone against a reinforced Japanese company for 18 minutes, providing sufficient time for the remainder of their battalion to land and establish a perimeter. Casualty reports indicated the defending platoon lost 2 men wounded, while the attacking Japanese company lost 63 killed and an estimated 40 wounded.
Japanese forces developed their own terminology for the weapons: Kikoshi no Rifle, or aircraft death rifles. Intercepted communications from January 1945 revealed Japanese commanders specifically warning their troops about American heavy-fire rifles and instructing infantry to focus fire on soldiers carrying drum-fed weapons. By February, Japanese tactical doctrine had shifted to emphasize nighttime attacks and close-range infiltration tactics, anything to negate the T-22's sustained fire advantage. However, the weapons possessed significant weaknesses that after-action reports documented in detail. The weight was physically punishing. Soldiers carrying T-22s experienced shoulder and back injuries at 3 times the rate of standard riflemen. The 23.7-pound load, combined with tropical heat and mountainous terrain, caused heat exhaustion in T-22 operators with disturbing frequency. On Luzon in January 1945, 6 T-22 gunners required medical evacuation for dehydration and heat stroke during a single day of mountain combat. The drum's mechanical complexity created maintenance challenges. Standard M1 Garand maintenance could be performed by any competent soldier with basic tools. T-22 drum maintenance required specialized wrenches, spring tension gauges, and training that most company armorers lacked. When drums failed, and they failed regularly in the Philippines' humidity and dust, they required return to depot-level maintenance facilities.
Units learned to stockpile spare drums, but the supply chain could not keep pace. By March 1945, the average rifle company authorized for 3 T-22s maintained 1.4 operational weapons. The reloading time represented the tactical weakness Japanese commanders learned to exploit. 90 seconds to load a fresh drum under ideal conditions translated to 2 to 3 minutes under fire, in darkness, with muddy fingers and incoming mortar rounds. Intelligent Japanese officers began timing their assault waves to strike American positions during suspected T-22 reload cycles. The tactic did not always succeed. Standard Garands and BARs still provided covering fire, but it worked often enough that American infantry learned to coordinate T-22 reloads, ensuring at least one drum-fed weapon remained operational. Despite these limitations, demand exceeded supply throughout the war's final months. After the Okinawa landings in April 1945, frontline commanders requested T-22s at rates 4 times higher than Ordnance Corps could deliver. The weapons achieved near-mythical status among infantry units. Soldiers who had never seen a T-22 claimed their squad possessed one. Japanese propaganda leaflets warned about American automatic rifles with endless ammunition, a significant exaggeration, but reflecting the psychological impact. Production continued through August 1945. Total wartime production reached 1,247 T-22 Garand AN-M2 hybrids. Approximately 1,200 reached combat units in the Pacific. The remainder stayed in depots, in training facilities, and in the possession of stateside units preparing for the planned invasion of Japan that never occurred. Engineering analysis, brilliance, and compromise. The engineering that enabled the T-22 to function represented simultaneously brilliant and compromised design, a weapon system that solved one problem while creating several others. Understanding the reasons requires examining how fundamentally different the T-22 was from both its parent systems.
Doctrinal legacy and long-term influence. Patton's Purge taught the American Army lessons that shaped military doctrine for decades following the war. Leadership accountability became a core principle of American military culture. The Army developed formal systems for rapid relief of commanders who failed to perform to standards during combat operations. This represented a distinctly American approach to military leadership. The British military operated differently, with a different cultural approach. Failed British commanders were typically reassigned to other positions rather than removed from the service entirely. The American approach of rapid relief and replacement created a more adaptable army that could adjust to changing circumstances and leadership requirements more quickly. Patton himself would eventually be removed from command in 1945, not for military failures, but for his outspoken political statements that embarrassed senior leadership. The system of accountability he had helped create and reinforce was eventually applied to him personally, demonstrating that no officer was exempt from consequences for actions deemed inappropriate. Statistical assessment and historical conclusions. The statistics from this period tell a clear and unambiguous story. At Kasserine Pass, 2nd Corps was routed and defeated comprehensively. At El Guitar, 2nd Corps defeated German counterattacks decisively. The difference between these two outcomes was leadership quality and training effectiveness. Patton preserved the effectiveness of the American Army in North Africa by making extremely difficult decisions regarding officer retention. He sacrificed the careers of a limited number of individuals to preserve the lives and effectiveness of the many soldiers under their command. When 2nd Corps attacked at El Guitar, those soldiers were fighting with restored confidence and effectiveness because Patton had finally made them believe they possessed the capability to win.
The transformation from defeated force to effective fighting army occurred in merely 10 days through decisive leadership, ruthless accountability, intensive training, and psychological restoration of confidence. This transformation represented one of the most remarkable leadership achievements in American military history and established principles that would guide American military operations for decades to come.